For those who are just understanding it as a national story, bring us back. It was 2011 when 24-year-old Lamar Smith was running from cops in his car. High-speed chase ensued. Evidently, he had a gun with him. When a cop was in pursuit, he was actually caught on camera, one of those body cams, saying, "When I capture this guy, I'm going to kill him." When he did catch up to him, 5 shots were fired, and they said that was proof this shooting was premeditated. But there seems to be more to this case. At least that's what the jury found.
Well, that's what the judge had determined. Absolutely. And Brian, it's good to be with you. And speaking, just personally and as a St. Louis native, not with an organization at the moment, but this is my hometown. I live blocks from the courthouse where the protests began earlier today. Right now, they're in Central West End, and I know you were talking with one of the local media there. There's a confluence of interstate highways that all dump out into Barnes Jewish Hospital right there, and that's really dangerous if you start shutting down those highways, those arteries to other parts of the city, because that's the big hospital there, and they get a lot of people coming in all throughout the night. So that's really dangerous. Nobody has the right to shut down a highway. But as for this case, this officer in question, Jason Stockley, the prosecutors had to prove, Brian, beyond a reasonable doubt that he did not act in self-defense, because he claimed that he did. This all began when he and his partner came upon what they said was a drug exchange. This individual, Anthony Lamar Smith, he is a prohibited possessor. He has a long record for being a drug dealer, heroin. We have an opioid epidemic right now in the United States. And he also had an illegally possessed handgun. So comes into a Church's Chicken parking lot. They see something going down. They approach the car. The guy, Anthony Lamar Smith, at that point, Brian, and there's video of this, backs out and attempts to mow down the officers. Now, that's assault with a deadly weapon. And then the officers give chase, as you mentioned, high-speed chase through downtown St. Louis, and it ultimately ended tragically with this man's death, a tragedy that could have been avoided. You don't run down police officers. You don't sit in the parking lot of a restaurant and deal dope. And then, of course, according to the testimony of this officer and his partner as well, there had been apparently an illegally possessed handgun. There were also apparently drugs in the vehicle as well. Now, there are 2 really good questions here, and I completely agree with questioning them. It does not prove premeditated murder. That was the prosecutor's responsibility with this case. They failed to do that beyond reasonable doubt. But what he said in the car absolutely asked questions. And, Brian, the fact that he had his own personal firearm with him in the backseat of the car, that was against the police department policy. That's why he was suspended earlier, because of those 2 things.
And, of course, the accusation was that the police put the gun in the car to justify the shooting. And then some also brought up in the case for the defense was, well, it's logical for a guy with heroin who dealt heroin to have a gun. It would be unusual for them not to have a gun. And then they cried, that's race-related. That's a racial conclusion, which I don't see that being race-related. As a heroin user, that just to me is what is a usual pattern.
And to point out, Brian, he had a record for illegal possession of a firearm before. That's why he was on parole. So he was already on parole for that. So, look, you don't use past evidence to convict someone in the present. You don't use their past record. But it is an indicator of what they're going to do in the future.
You remember the damage done in Ferguson. I hope the police are able to be empowered to protect their city. They seem to be. They seem to be much more organized. But I was speaking with Dave Glover, who's on my affiliate, KFTK, I think you're familiar with. He says he fears a lot for tomorrow. He says there's going to be a U2 concert on Saturday and Ed Sheeran on Sunday. And with those big crowds and all the cameras, they feel as though they're organized enough online and they're coming from out of state. They talk to people from South Carolina. He thinks the worst is yet to come, if not tonight, over the weekend.
It could very well happen. It would be a great opportunity for them to get more media attention. And look, here's the thing. Shutting down highways, I'm really curious. There's so many people who are busting from out of town. And, Brian, you know this. You and I have talked about this with regards to Ferguson. There were so many people bust into Ferguson. If all of these individuals want to claim that there's something wrong with the system, why don't they vote? Why was voter turnout so bad in St. Louis? Half the people aren't even aware of the judges running, like the judge, Brian, who gave the decision in this case, because it wasn't a jury trial. It was this judge's decision. Nobody was even aware you could vote for or against these individuals. So don't claim that there's something wrong with the system when your lack of a vote shapes that system. You were part of that system. You have to participate in your community. That's a huge problem here. I hope there's peace tomorrow. I hope that people can solve this civilly. I pray for my city.
I will say, too, that two reporters I spoke to, one of which was Dave, he says if he was more fearful as night fell on this day than he was at any time during Ferguson. And if we put up some of the video from Ferguson, we know how bad that got.
It got very bad indeed. And I think, as you mentioned, there was a Cardinals baseball game earlier today. You have two huge concerts that are coming up. And, of course, right there by all of the local media departments, right there by the stadium, by everything. It's a great place to get media attention. And that's what individuals want. They want media attention. You know, look, sometimes the verdicts don't go your way. Sometimes people, if you want to talk about justice, let's talk about the justice of somebody who has been a drug dealer and a prohibited possessor. Don't run down cops, and you don't have people who lose their lives, period.
Right. Dana, your impression, and I'm putting you on the spot here to a degree. I remember the two big racial incidents that happened with President Obama. With Trayvon Martin, he said, Trayvon could be my son. And remember when he had an incident with that professor, that Cambridge professor, when he said the police acted stupidly. From the White House, what do you think the best role for the president in something like this, when this is his first taste of racial unrest? I couldn't say first taste. This is his latest taste.
Yeah, well, not really the first taste of it. Honestly, you know, I don't know why the president would weigh in on this particular situation, because this isn't a White House issue. This isn't a federal government issue. This is an issue of a community that needs to come together and talk with their law enforcement agencies. This is a community that needs to stand up. This is a community. Look, I lived in St. Louis. I lived blocks from the Arch, Brian. I had a drug den open down just blocks from me. I had one that opened up on the end of my street before I left the city of St. Louis. You know what the problem in St. Louis is? The problem isn't racial disparity. The problem is a political party that has ran this city into a hole in the ground, Brian. That's the problem with St. Louis. The problem is the opportunity that is swindled from St. Louis City residents by these Democrat Party leaders, by race baiters, by these hustlers who are busting from out of town. And look what they do to my city, our city.